Summerslam. It's a storytelling midpoint from one WrestleMania to the next. Though many big feuds can take shape during this annual event, it's also known for its fair share of iconic moments and matches that can stand alone. 2 weeks ago I showcased some of the absolute worst, but now this week I'm gonna rank them, the top 8 best SummerSlam matches and moments of all time. Number 8, the Ultimate Squash. I'm going to go on record and say the Honky Tonk Man's one of the most unlikely stars in Federation history. First brought in for an ill-fated babyface run, Honky turned heel and got hot in the post-WrestleMania 3 landscape, beating Ricky Steamboat for the Intercontinental title just 2 months after the Dragon won it. His shocking victory would turn into a record-setting 15-month reign that no one's come close to ever since. But the clock struck midnight for the Honky Donkey Man, as Santino Marella called him, at the first ever SummerSlam in 1988. After his original opponent, Brutus Beefcake, was taken out of action due to an attack by Outlaw Ron Bass, the ever-confident Honky challenged anyone to come out and face him. Much to his dismay, anyone was the Ultimate Warrior, who'd been a force of nature since debuting the previous October. Not giving Honky a chance to flee, Warrior squashed him in 30 seconds to the cheers of the MSG crowd to become the new champion. Blinking you miss it matches weren't anything new, but fans had never seen a champion with that long of a reign lose it in such dominant fashion. Honky would never come close to singles gold again, while this was the beginning of Warrior's mega push to the stratosphere of the WWF hierarchy that peaked at WrestleMania 6. Number 7, the second ladder match. Just a heads up, we're going to be talking a bit about Shawn Michaels in this countdown, beginning with this match from 1995. As spring turned to summer, the recently turned babyface Michaels is in a program with Sid, and the two are set to face off at SummerSlam. But one look at the rest of the card, Diesel vs. King Mabel, Bret Hart vs. Isaac Yankem, Kama vs. The Undertaker for example, made the Federation realize they had to make some changes in order to get fans to actually buy the show. Soon Sid was out and Razor Ramon was in, setting the stage for a ladder match for the Intercontinental title, a return bout from what was then the most innovative match in company history. A lot had changed in those 18 months after WrestleMania 10, most of the fact that Shawn and Razor were both good guys, taking out the grudge aspect of things and forcing them to wrestle a more scientific match while still using the ladder as a weapon. The two men gave the fans a more struggle-oriented match that relied less on big bumps than the first ladder match, adding a new dimension by bringing a second ladder into the fray. It's important to point out that in 1995, 2 ladders in the match at one time was a very big deal. Despite the complete lack of build for the match after the last-minute booking change, Shawn and Razor delivered on the bright promise of a rematch of one of the all-time classic Mania matches ever. It might not have been as flashy as their first ladder encounter, but it's still one of the better matches in SummerSlam history, during a period where those were few and far between. Number 6, Hulk Hogan vs. Shawn Michaels. I told you it was going to be on both lists. Over the years, only a handful of men have had the ear of Vince McMahon in terms of creative, but perhaps none got away with as much as Hulk Hogan. Not only did he get entire programs that the likes of Jake Roberts and Rick Rude vetoed, he was able to secure a long-term push for his best bud, Brutus Beefcake. If that's not stroke, I don't know what is. Then in the mid-90s, it was the group known as The Clique that flexed their political muscle backstage. At their peak, the group led by Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, and Diesel often knocked on Vince McMahon's door and volunteered ideas, some more beneficial to themselves than others. The irresistible force and immovable object of wrestling politics finally collided in the summer of 2005. After a brief but popular pairing, Shawn Michaels turned on the Hulkster after a victory celebration, which would in turn lead to some of the best heel work of HBK's career. From an appearance on a parody of Larry King Live to enraging the Montreal crowd with a Bret Hart tease, Shawn appeared to take a lot of pleasure in chewing the scenery at the expense of his opponent. But Michaels' joyful mood went sour after being told how things would go in the match. After some tense negotiations that ran the gamut of a 3-match series, to Hogan winning 2 matches, to Hogan winning the one and only match, Shawn was told to do the job. In terms of backstage clout, the student could not defeat the master. What followed could best be described as the most professional temper tantrum in wrestling history. Shawn just wasn't a human pinball in the match, he was a human Super Ball, bouncing from pillar to post as if Hogan were Popeye and had eaten 100 cans of spinach. HBK made Hogan look so cartoonishly strong, he also kind of buried him in the process. The frustration was etched into Hogan's face as the match went on before he ultimately won, because that's all that really mattered to him, while the Teflon Michaels suffered no punishment of his own. While the in-ring action tested the limits of even the most gullible viewer, it was still a memorable and highly entertaining clash of styles and generations. Number 5, TLC 1. It's not a coincidence that the worst and best periods in WWE's history directly correlate with the quality of the undercard, in particular the tag team divisions. 95 had cheesy acts at the Godwins, the Smoking Guns, Men on a Mission, and the Quebecers, while the late 90s saw some incredible action from teams like the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, and the Dudleys. The first TLC match came from humble beginnings when the Hardys and ENC tore the house down in a tag team ladder match at No Mercy 99. The Dudleys were added to the mix for WrestleMania 2000 when they took part in a 3-team ladder match. Finally, for that year's Summerslam, things escalated to their natural conclusion with the first ever TLC match about to combine the use of each team's favorite weapon. If the Shawn Michaels Razor Ramon ladder matches were basic algebra, then the TLC matches were advanced calculus and steel-runged, wood-splintered, chair-bending violence. After 15 minutes of insanity, the sneaky Edge and Christian snatched the tag title belts and the victory. The match set a new precedent for wild demolition derby-type ferocity that many in wrestling have tried to reach and exceed in the years since, for better or worse. As one of the most influential matches of the last 20 years, the first TLC match is easily one of the top SummerSlam moments. Number 4. A match made in heaven. There are a few sure things in wrestling, one of which being that if a wedding is happening on wrestling programming, it almost never goes off without a hitch. But SummerSlam 91 proved an exception to the rule. After years of highs and lows between them, Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth finally rekindled their on-air relationship after Savage lost his retirement match to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 7. Sensational Sherry, having lost her meal ticket, took her anger out on the Macho Man, prompting the First Lady of the Federation to stand by her man. Savage and Liz would embrace in the ring to the delight of the cheering and, in some cases, tearful fans in attendance. As the months went on, the relationship between them grew until Savage finally popped the question on a July episode of Superstars.
Will you marry me?
Oh, yeah.
Though Savage and Liz had actually been married in real life since 1984 and would divorce in 92, the duo tied the kayfabe knot in the main event of SummerSlam 91 in the middle of the ring in Madison Square Garden, promoted as the Match Made in Heaven. It was the only wrestling wedding to ever appear on pay-per-view until TNA did it 17 years later at Slammiversary 2008. But as opposed to the nuptials between Jay Lethal and SoCal Val, this one was decidedly shenanigan-free.
That's what it's all about right there. A kiss seen around the world.
Son of a bitch. Said I wouldn't cry. Though a sappy wedding might not be the best way to end a pay-per-view, it was a fitting and satisfying end to a storyline fans have been following for 6 years. Of course, the reception having zero drama was never guaranteed. Number 3. Brock Lesnar destroys John Cena. Whether you want to put the blame on him or the creative team for not wanting to damage its merchandising cash cow, John Cena had a reputation for rising above many promising acts for years, but that reputation shifted at SummerSlam 2014. After a rocky start from his 2012 return, WWE seemed intent on rebuilding Brock Lesnar as the monster he should have been in the first place. He shocked the world when he beat The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30, ending the streak. Then he was on to SummerSlam to challenge for the championship. Apparently the original plan was to have Daniel Bryan's Cinderella story come to a violent end at the hands of Lesnar, but Bryan's real-life injuries got in the way, leading to Cena taking his place as the sacrificial lamb. In what can only be described as a glorified squash match, Cena was destroyed in the beatdown that no other top star in any other promotion in history had been allowed to take before or since. After more than a dozen suplexes and a couple of F5s, Lesnar finally finished off Cena and claimed the big 2 belts for his own. The shocking nature of the match, along with the fact of who was receiving the beating, makes this one of the wildest moments that SummerSlam has ever seen. Number 2. The Comeback Kid. By 1998, Shawn Michaels had established himself as one of the most gifted performers of his generation, even as his personal demons began to take over his life behind the scenes. But that would change during his title match at that year's Royal Rumble, when a tumble over the casket by the ring ruptured several discs in his back, an injury he waited until after WrestleMania 14 to correct. Though he kept appearing on TV in roles such as commissioner, referee, and commentator, it seemed as though his in-ring days were all but over. In 2002, however, Shawn's old buddies Kevin Nash and Scott Hall came back to the company for their much-maligned New World Order revival. After Scott Hall was fired for doing Scott Hall things, Michaels and his Kangol hat were recruited to take place in the group, still not wrestling, but acting as a spokesman. Then that fell through when Nash tore his quad after the strenuous task of walking, leaving the NWO DOA. The planned SummerSlam encounter between Nash and Triple H was nixed, and after a somewhat contrived build featuring swerves upon swerves, it was Shawn who would step up and take on the game. I mean, the pedigree to Shawn after the Tease DX reunion should have been enough, but no, then there was this mystery beatdown in the parking lot and a couple of weeks of speculation. Oh, turns out it was Triple H who did it the whole time. What a shock! Well, I mean, that kind of nuanced storytelling is why I would never last a week in creative. However convoluted the build might have been, the match itself was one of the most spectacular comeback performances in the history of pro wrestling. Whatever limitations Shawn may have had in his first match back in 4 years looked to be totally non-existent, as he and Hunter put on the match of the night in one of the best received Summerslams of all time en route to an HBK victory. The match restored Michael's confidence in himself and his body's ability to hold up, and soon Shawn came back as a regular performer for almost 8 more years in a run that many consider better than his first. And the best SummerSlam moment in history is Bret Hart versus the British Bulldog. SummerSlam 1992, a show that was meant to take place in Landover, Maryland, until the demand for European shows was so strong, the Federation was convinced to take the show to historic Wembley Stadium in London, England. The unique nature of this SummerSlam, the first and only one to take place outside of North America, required a compelling main event featuring a hometown hero. The problem was, the British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith wasn't exactly high on the priority list by that point. The fact that his WrestleMania match with the Berserker that year was cut for time should be enough of an indication of that. But in time, Davey got the momentum needed to prove himself a contender to brother-in-law Bret Hart's Intercontinental Championship. The on-camera family feud finally reached its peak in the SummerSlam main event. The whole thing nearly got derailed minutes after the first bell. Despite Bret meticulously crafting how the match was going to go in advance, Bulldog apparently forgot all of it, his mind trapped in a London fog after spending several days smoking crack with Jim Neidhart. Classic Anvil! Ever prideful in his work, Bret took the Bulldog by the horns and led Davey Boy to a great match, finally answering the age-old question, can you lead a wrestler coming down off a crack binge to a 4+ star match? The answer? A resounding yes! These two had an absolute classic, widely considered to be the best bout for the IC title since Savage and Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. The fans were sent home happy after the hometown hero blocked a sunset flip attempt and hooked Bret's legs through the pin. Bulldog was the belle of the ball that night in front of 85,000 fellow countrymen, but it was Bret who would break out in the main event scene. The Hitman would become WWF champion less than 2 months after SummerSlam, while Bulldog would be gone from the company by mid-November. Nevertheless, this classic match in the grandest setting yet cemented SummerSlam's position as a second WrestleMania, and that's why it's number 1 on our list of top moments. What did I miss? Let me know in the comment section below. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.